Today we will have our student report on Beethoven, and I will give my little tidbits about Beethoven as well, and some of the music that we will study by Beethoven. We'll also have a review for our third exam, which will be this week. So, here we go.
If you look in your book on page 232 through 236, you will read about Beethoven. So there's a lot of great information about Beethoven. He's a very interesting composer. And we will have our student report on Beethoven, followed by tidbits by me. Beethoven's father was an abusive alcoholic. And so his dad would go out at night, get drunk, bring his drunk friends home, pull Beethoven out of bed, and force him to play the piano or the harpsichord for his friends. And actually, at one point in time, Beethoven had to sue his father or take his father to court to get part of his salary because his father was spending all of the money he earned on alcohol, and there was not enough money to buy food for the family. And so Beethoven took his father to court in order to get the part of his father's paycheck in order to buy food for the family. Beethoven gradually went deaf throughout his life. He was pretty much completely deaf by the time he died. Unfortunately, this started when he was in his 20s. Just when he was going to start this great career as a piano player, he starts going deaf. But as a result, he began to do more composing. He realized he was not going to be able to perform for his livelihood. Interestingly, in order to hear the vibrations of the harpsichord, he cut off its legs so it lay flat on the floor, and he could put his ear to the floor to listen to the vibrations of the harpsichord, and he could tell better, he could hear better about what he was composing. So he continued to compose throughout his entire life, even though he went completely deaf. Beethoven was also very messy, and he would compose on the walls and on the shutters of the homes where he rented rooms. And he also frequently lost his temper and would throw things at people. So as a result, he never got married. Surprisingly, right? So he was a really eccentric type of person, and so very interesting character. Beethoven wrote a lot of music for the piano. The piano was this new and upcoming instrument that everyone was really loving, and they loved the sound of it. And he actually helped develop the piano and the progression of the evolution of the piano as well. Because as he would play, strings would break, and he said it was just like a rat's nest inside the piano with all these broken strings, and he wanted a bigger sound, but every time he played with a bigger sound, the strings would break. And so he helped to develop putting iron and metal braces inside of the piano, which now we have an entire metal iron plate inside the piano. But he started helping them introduce iron bracing inside the piano so that they could make the strings thicker and stronger, and you could get a bigger sound and use a bigger hammer to hit the strings and not break the strings. If they had put the kind of pressure with the type of strings that we have today on a harpsichord, it would just break the harpsichord in half. And so they wanted these bigger, thicker strings to have a bigger sound, to fill the bigger concert halls. And so they began to, and with Beethoven's help, began putting all this ironwork inside the piano to give it more strength. We're going to look at one of the sonatas that Beethoven wrote, and I just love this entire sonata. Usually we don't listen to all three movements of one piece, but I just think all the movements of this piece are just fantastic. And the book actually covers all of the movements of this piece. So if you look on page 236, all the way through page 239, finishes up, no, actually 238, 236 through 238, you will see the information about this sonata. And it is called the Sonata Pathétique, and it's his sonata in C minor. And the first movement, you see The tempo is grave. It looks like grave, but it's actually grave, which means very slow and very serious. And so this beginning part is very, again, it has a big, bold sound that he used on the piano. And then about a minute, 41 seconds in, you get this allegro di molto e con brio, which means fast with brightness. And so it's very fast and lively. And so this is just a great piece, lots of great running passages and virtuosity to be heard. Then the second movement is Adagio cantabile, which is slow and lyrical, very singing style. And then the third movement is the rondo, where you have your A theme, then your B theme, and you keep coming back to the A section, and then you have a section that'd be the C section, and you keep coming back to A with this little coda at the end. So just a great piece. I think it's about 20 minutes long, but it's just worth hearing the whole thing because it's just a fantastic piece. One of the most famous melodies ever written is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. Almost everyone is familiar with that little fragment of music. It is just a great piece. Now, there's two forms that you can listen to. I kind of like the silly symphony version. That is where you have P.D.Q. Bach, who is a musician that is also a comedian, who takes classical music and sort of makes fun of it. And so he does this with Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. So you want to watch the silly version of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony if you prefer the more humorous version. But if you want to hear the more serious, actual version of it and follow along with the listening guide, that's on pages 239 through 246. The movements I most recommend are the first movement, the second movement, and the fourth movement. Those are my favorite ones. And so the first movement is in sonata form, where you have your exposition. Then you have a first and second theme, followed by the development. You develop what you've been exposed to at the beginning, and then you have the recapitulation at the end, which brings it all back together again, and of course a coda, where that's a little tail ending of the piece. Then in the second movement, you have a theme and variation. Remember, this is where you have your main melody. It's kind of a lyrical melody there, and that's then variations of that melody are played throughout the piece. So you have theme A, theme B, then you have variation of A, a variation of B, and then a second variation of A, then there's this middle section, then you have a third variation of A, and the coda. Of course, I can't leave the coda out. Then in the fourth movement, it is also in the sonata form, and so you have your exposition, your development, and your recapitulation, plus the coda. So I hope you enjoy either one, whichever you like best, either the silly version of the Symphony No. 5 or the more classic, traditional version of the Fifth Symphony.
As you study for this exam, your best study guide is page 178 to 179 and 247 to 248. You need to study the lives of our 9 featured composers, and I will have some descriptions that you will have to match with the composers. And the composers you will need to study are Monteverdi, Purcell, Corelli, Vivaldi, Bach, Handel, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. You need to know where are they from, what country were they born in, where did they work, what country did they work in, what kind of music did they write, where did they work, what kind of instrument did they play, what else were they known for, did they invent any type of instrument or any form of music. Those are the type of things that you'll be matching up with the composers' names. 3, understand how sacred, secular, and instrumental music changed from the Baroque era through the Classical era. How was the music different? How was the instrumentation different? How was the music written different? Were the forms different? How did it change?
Number 4, understand how patronship of musicians and composers changed from the Baroque through the classical eras. Who was paying them? Who was employing them? How did that change from the Baroque to the classical era? Number 5, there will be 20 terms to match with definitions. So study the terms listed under important terms and feature genres on page 178 to 179 and also on page 247. Finally, what musical forms, styles, and instruments were invented during the Baroque and Classical eras? I will have the two words there, Baroque and Classical, and then you have to match them up with descriptions of musical instruments and forms that were invented, and you do know which era they were invented during.
I hope you've enjoyed our unit about the Baroque and the Classical era. This is really when modern music begins, when many of the modern foundations of music start. You'll want to be sure you read both chapters on the Baroque era, which starts on page 117, and then the Classical era starts on page 183 and goes all the way through page 250. Actually, 248 is when it ends. All right, learn and know how music is changing, how instrumental music is changing through time, how sacred music is changing through time, how secular music is changing through time. How does it start in the Baroque era, and how does it change as we go through the Classical era? And what was happening in society that caused these changes? Know about the lives of the composers. Again, you have the composers on your review pages and your featured genres and important terms. The composers, again, are Bach, Monteverdi, Purcell, Corelli, Vivaldi, and Handel. Those are all listed, and you can get information on them. It tells you what pages to find information on them. And then as we go to the back of the Classical era chapters, you will see the major composers are Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. So read about those again in your book. Be sure that you know how the forms of music are changing over time and how the instrumentation is changing, what kind of new instruments are being invented, things like that. Those are the things that are going to be on your exam. And so be sure you read all of your text, listen to all of the musical examples, and see how music is developing through these two eras. And I look forward to seeing you next time.